AFROPUNK fam, I'm Bridget Todd, and I am so excited to be connecting with you all today. I'm joining y'all from the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C., and I want to know, where is everybody tuning in from? You can use the chat to let us know where you're from. And consider turning on your camera so we can see all of your beautiful faces. Now, historically, many celebrated Black artists have used their art to inform, report, inspire, and spark revolutionary action. And today we're hearing from a talented group of artists and curators who will explore where we are now and help imagine a Black future that includes justice and radical joy. So let's get to know our panelists. Tyree, let's start with you. Introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, my name is Tyree Boyd Pates. I'm a Los Angeles-based museum curator and historian, and I work in museums to make sure that the ways in which Blackness is seen is done in an elevated and dignified way. Thank you for having me.
Beautiful. Cleaver, introduce yourself.
Hey y'all, my name is Cleaver Cruz. I am from the Boogie Down Bronx. I just want to give a shout out to my mama and all the women that did the work for me to be here in this moment. I'm thankful. I know I'm a little bit freer because they've allowed that for me. And I do work around joy through the Black Joy Project and just using my imagination to tell the stories that did not exist when I needed them the most.
That's so beautiful. I'm happy that you shouted out your mom and all the women who did the work. I love it. Yes. I love it. Next up, Dr. Bev. It's an honor to have you here. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, fam. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Bev Ditzi. I'm in Johannesburg right now. I'm a filmmaker. I'm an activist. I do TV and film in particular because I really believe that the way that we are seen and the way that we see ourselves affects how we relate to one another. And I'm very concerned about how we are depicted because we're not in charge of our narratives. And I'm here to undo that as much as I possibly can.
I love it. So my first question is for you, Dr. Bev. You know, you're an artist, a filmmaker, an activist. How would you describe the evolution of Black protest art?
Black protest art, from a South African point of view, I was born during apartheid in the 70s. I grew up knowing and understanding my mother's, Miriam Makeba, Letambulu. I grew up, my mother herself was a musician growing up. And so I grew up understanding when our people were not allowed to speak certain words, when they were not allowed to use words like freedom, even in their music. I grew up having people banned. Huma Sekela was banned. A lot of the people we know were banned. And so I understood why they were banned. I think I grew up understanding that art is powerful because art manages to reach the people in ways that very few other mediums are able to reach people. And so growing up in that kind of environment made me very aware of what my role would possibly be, because I also, grew up as a child actor in South African television during apartheid. I've just always been in the thick of understanding how art is used against the people or for the people, depending on what you're able to do. And so, knowing just the work that our mothers and our fathers actually did during apartheid to even bring the attention of the world to what was going on in South Africa was phenomenal. And it is I made one of my other films was on that, on, the Free Mandela campaign, was artists actually bringing this to the attention of the world. And so for me, art has always been very powerful. And so I understand when art is suppressed. I understand when we are suppressed as artists. I understand when we are not supported or funded. I get it, because we are dangerous.
Definitely. Dr. Bev just talked about sort of where we've been as a people in terms of art as protest. But Tyree, as a curator, I want to talk a bit about this moment that we're in right now. Can you describe a little bit of how you've seen art heal the minds and hearts of our people during this time that we're in that is so fraught for so many people?
Absolutely. When I think about Black art, I think about the ways in which it's fashioned in the middle of a protest, right? Like in all protests, traditionally there is a renaissance that follows afterward. And I think that the art that is going to come out of this moment and the art that will follow will actually be art that reflects the self-esteem of Blackness across the entire diaspora. And it's really important that we give amplification to those artists who are in an intersectional way, particularly Black queer artists, because in this moment, they're actually the ones who are really telling the truth about what it means to be, to have multiple oppressions working at the same time. And as a curator, I can't even tell you how excited I am at the opportunities that these artists are going to have, particularly through institutional approaches at finally making equity and justice felt within museums. So I'm optimistic, and I'm employing an abundance mindset, because I think these artists have been waiting for this moment for a long time to finally get their just due.
Ooh, I love the abundance mindset. I love that. That brings me to you, Cleaver. You know, we talk a lot about protest art in Black spaces, but I also want to remember that Blackness also involves Black joy and happiness and our stories and dancing and love and light. What role have you seen joy play in Black art, Cleaver?
Well, I want to say, like most Black things, that it's rooted in history, right? That Black joy is an ancestral thing. As long as Black people have existed, which we agree we were the first, Black joy has existed innately in humanity in that way. That's all to say that in this moment, as it always has been, and what I was hearing Tyree say is it's a yes and, that joy is always existing in the same context as whatever oppression that we're experiencing. I saw that, I think about Dr. Bev's film, Simon and I, of watching these people marching, and that there's a joy in the context of the persecution of queerness, of LGBTQ folks, right? That in Brazil, you might be able to listen right now to protest songs that sound like samba and people are dancing and things, but the lyrics are about taking down military forces and the ways that Black people are experiencing a genocide in that region of the world. That's what it feels like joy does, is it's the entry point, is what I'm saying. It can be the entry right now into really understanding how are we as people, Black people anywhere in the world, being impacted by white supremacy and all its little cousins, because it does show up differently, but it's connected. And I think joy can do that because we also understand the power of it, whether we're using the language to name it, whatever we're calling it. Black people know joy. That's not an introduction. It's just that often we're not getting the space to do it. And it feels like in this moment in particular, as somebody that's been tracking it for at least the last 5 years or so, there is a heightened, like speaking on it, like really naming joy right now as a way to be that. As Tyree was saying, in the middle of protests, we're seeing people dancing, we're seeing people voguing, doing all these different things that of course has happened. Those were there. That's not new in 2020. But that now it seems like we're having the space to really be clear on that it's there and why is it there and what is it doing for us. And I think that's important because joy is part of the tools to create the future, what comes after the revolution, not just to the revolution, but what's after. And I think we have joy there. We get to be healed there. Yeah, I'm ranting.
No, that's beautiful. Dr. Joy, or Dr. Bev, I see you nodding so much. What do you think about this? What role do you think Black joy plays in resistance and protest and art?
Yeah, we are such an amazing people. We are so multifaceted that I think we confuse the enemy in so many different ways, because a lot of the time where we are expected to be doing something, we're doing something completely different. You know, I am finding that even in the different protests that we are having in Johannesburg, because I think there's protest around the world. I think fascism is kind of taking root and taking over. And there's always confusion when you're finding people actually dancing. Even when you're drumming, there's dancing. I just think that we know how to find the depth within ourselves to understand that our entire lives have been a struggle. As Black and brown and queer folk and as female identifying folk, we are constantly under attack. And if you don't find some ways to have joy within yourself, wow, how do we live without the joy? You find people say, you know, these are such oppressed people, but they're always having fun. Like, well, we actually really, what else do you do? I mean, we're not going to go and you know, we have to live. We live in these spaces.
Right.
We live in our communities. We live in these homes. And so we find the joy. We make the joy wherever we go. And I love that, because that really does confuse the enemy. It cannot pin us down. I'm finding that, you know, in a lot of our TV shows and in a lot of our commercials in South Africa, our people are just dancing all the time. And it's infuriating to us, because, you know, can we not be a little bit more innovative when we're selling our hand washing soap? You know, why our mamas constantly dancing, whether it's like a, you know, a bank that they're advertising, is like we're constantly like, oh, we're dancing all the damn time, because they don't know how else to depict us except for seeing us looking as though we are not affected by what's going on in the world around us. But that's just because we have this inherent thing where we know that we have to have the joy, because we can't wait for them to change. We can't wait for them to give us the joy.
I love that. I love that. You know, you talked about the way that dancing and joy can kind of be used to confuse our enemy. I have a question for Tyree. As a curator, how else have you seen Black joy be used as a way to root yourself in resistance, to confuse our enemy? How have you seen joy and Black art playing into that?
Again, these questions are fire, Bridget, because that joy that everyone is talking about, whether it's Cleaver or Dr. Bev, is really an entry point into the vibrancy of Black culture across the diaspora that also has never actually been codified by like white supremacy in the larger canon that they're trying to draft about us. And that's because they usually want to depict us as being hyper emotional or overly sensational about the things that we are undergoing. But when you're Black, you know that the tears can actually come from happiness, and the happiness actually may come because you experience pain. And these things are not mutually exclusive, even though white supremacy wants to tell us that. But in art, you can see the three-dimensional aspects of Blackness that, again, whiteness as a structure doesn't want to afford to Blackness in more societal ways. And that's where we reclaim the narrative. That's where the joy and the pain and all of our beauty can actually be displayed in its fullness when we have control of the narrative through the brushstroke, or whether it's through performance art. So I'm grateful of the joy. I have the joy too.
Yes, I can feel the joy from all of you all today.
We generate the joy.
Yes, we're not in the same place, but I'm picking it up. I'm using it. You know, I have a question for everybody. I think in this moment in time, it's been a little disappointing for me to see how many Black artists are afraid to speak up, or not speaking up, or failing to really use their art to speak to this moment. And so this is a question for everybody. Do you think that there are Black artists who are afraid of like getting political or making a statement or reaffirming that Black joy and Black resistance that we talked about? And how would you like to see more Black artists using their craft to do that? Dr. Bev, I would love to start with you.
Oh, wow. I was fixing my mind. I hooked on so many different artists in my own country and in different parts of the world. And I realized that I've begun to see two different types. I mean, I don't know if you'd call them artists, but we in South Africa have this thing where we promote celebrity over artist. And celebrity, you know, in my humble opinion, is so easily bought, because celebrity wants fame for its own sake. Celebrity doesn't even care how it gets the fame or what it needs to do. And I'm finding that there's a big marginalization of artists in my country. The poets in my country are not considered very much. They don't get much work. The writers are not getting much work. My close friend whose place I'm in is a great musician, and they have to create their own work because they say too much, they speak too much, they question too much in their own music. And I'm finding that's becoming a global phenomenon. I'm hearing more and more from artists who are not saying anything. So we're dancing to people who are not saying much. We are reading and we're watching films from people who are not saying much. And so once in a while, when you find someone who says the things that they need to say, whether it is Miss Ava or it is someone else in other parts of the world, you know, you get excited because it's easy to suppress artists. We also have to eat. We also have to live. We have families to feed. And as a result, we are finding ourselves very easily, those who do find themselves very easily bought, just simply because you've got to eat. There is one poet sister who has kids who starved for years. And so when we finally see her performing in places where we would never perform, you know, a lot of us said, eat, sis. Eat. I can't feed your family for you. And that, unfortunately, is how art gets suppressed and how artists get suppressed. And I've seen it throughout the years. My mother was one of the people who did not leave the country, but was also one of the people who spoke too much. And so, you know, her art also died in the process because you can only fight so much before you give up. So a lot of art dies, a lot of artists die.
Yeah, I definitely have seen, this might sound a bit strange, but I don't feel like Black artists are really given the opportunity to sort of rest on our laurels, right? Like other kinds of artists, they might make something that's just, you know, you make it, get a check, whatever. I don't feel like those are the kinds of opportunities that Black folks really get. Cleaver, you know, as an artist, what do you think? Have you seen, are there times where you wish more Black folks would use their art and their voice and their craft to really say something? And how do we walk this line of wanting to eat, but also wanting to say something that's really real about our experiences?
I'm thinking about my friend Fatima Jamal, who is an artist and a filmmaker, and I've heard her talk about the precariousness of representation, and that if we're worried about being seen in certain spaces that weren't designed for us, we're actually not giving attention to the people who are doing the work. And for your question, the question that comes to my mind is, are we paying attention to the people who are putting the protest work in their art? Not should artists do more of it, but in the first place, are we actually giving the attention to that work? Because it's there. There's Black trans women creating amazing work right now. There's Black queer people creating amazing work that is really pushing the meter. And we have to ask ourselves, are we in those spaces too? You know, like what are we actually attached to? And what is the message that we want to keep affirming for ourselves versus the one that might truly lead to a liberatory practice or way of thinking that is being presented to us around the world? So yeah, I think for me, I'm not going to talk so much about who should be doing what, but are we paying attention to the ones who are doing it, who actually are making that happen, who don't have the food to eat and stuff and are still making it, that we could be supporting to do that? Because we know as artists that regardless of the resource, it's not a choice we have to make. It's not a choice. And that the luxury is when we get to live off of it and that we actually can do that. Because again, like Blackness, Black art has been around, whether people were commodifying it or not, that we have to see it from that place too. So we also have to be paying attention to people like Fatima Jamal, people like Aaron Lang, who did an amazing series of conversations, really centering Black trans women with messages that have changed my life. I watched conversations this summer that changed my life, that I think more people can be paying attention to. That, yeah, like we're here. That's also the moment of 2020 is the Black queer folk, the geniuses, all of us, we've been here. Dr. Bev has been here. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do we, it's not about we made it just now, is we've been here and people need to catch up and look in those mirrors, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Tyree, I see you snapping and nodding. What do you think?
I mean, echoing the rest of the cipher, like the beauty again of Black art is that whether we want it to be made or not, the ones who know the ancestors' whispers and calls are hearing the messages and are putting their paper to pen, their brushstroke to canvas, their voice to musical note. Like this revolution is generated by those who are called to the moment. And as a historian within museums, my job is just to amplify. I think there's been a lot of conversation about the ways in which museums depict Blackness as of late, particularly in the movement for Black Lives. But I think the best way that the museums can catch up to the movement is giving the microphone back over to the artists who are architecting the ways in which the movement will impact the future. And I'm excited to be a part of a certain vanguard that will protect Black artists, to make sure that they're paid in an equitable way, to make sure that the sincerity of their art isn't stolen or commodified in institutional spaces. And that's the way that we can actually build the bridge between the institution and those who are on the grassroots. So it's exciting times. And I know some great artists here in LA, like Hasef and Eileen, who are really, and Ferrari Shepherd, who are doing some amazing work. So I definitely encourage others to dive in, because the movement is happening now.
I love it. Well, that's a great question. I would love to propose that to all of y'all. Who are your favorite Black artists right now who are using their art as a tool of Black liberation? Dr. Bev, let's start with you. Who do you love right now who maybe isn't getting enough shine?
In terms of musicians, we have artists like Msaki, who is saying a lot and is not yet being heard. King Ta Thandiswa Mazwai, who's been around. King Ta's been around. King Ta gets very little support when she puts together women-only spaces and curates all these different spaces for women in expression. I am for this. I just went blank on their name, a trans artist that does a lot of incredible work, known on Instagram as Wakomboy. I am watching and listening to a lot of incredible artists that I've just gone blank on. My apologies. I hope this question comes back around, or I'm able to just kind of say something, because yeah. But there's quite a few artists, and I think what excites me more than anything is that during this lockdown that happened globally, you know, one thing that I knew and we all knew is that the artists are doing the art. While everyone else was scrambling to find content, the artists were artisting. I was very excited, because now the art is popping. I'm seeing a lot of incredible work coming up. Nico Poco is coming out with his paintings right now as well. There's a lot of incredible art coming out, not just in South Africa, but on the continent. So it's exciting.
It's such an exciting time for Black arts. Cleaver, who do you want to shout out? Who are some Black artists who are really using their art and their voice in service of our resistance?
This is hard, but I'm gonna use art expansively. So one is, I'll say, the Dip Sauce podcast coming out of the Netherlands. It's created by Black women, Ebise, Anusha, and Mariam, who they report mainly in Dutch about the experience of Black people of color in the Netherlands and Europe. Shout out to the Chiki Natives, which is out of South Africa, my friend Letoho Ngonolo, and his partner in crime, who drew a podcast around African writers and African literature, which is really dope. People I mentioned earlier, Fatima Jamal, who's an artist and a filmmaker, Aaron Lang, who's just a genius. Munga Yende, who is a Burundian artist living in Europe, who is an amazing writer, who writes incredibly in like 4 languages about her experiences. There's this artist, Daish, from the US, who makes amazing remixed versions of like childhood cartoons. This is my first superhero, Susie Carmichael. You already know, but that's Black girl genius. There's Justice Dwight, a Black queer artist out of Virginia, who I've had this piece for a long time. Afropunk has featured his work before. There's Blue, who's my little button right here, has a company called Black Boy D that's all about promoting that freedom within Black boyhood. There's so many more, but these artists are out here. They've been here. They didn't start in 2020, and they're definitely worth following their work.
Cleaver, you're like a walking museum of Black art. I love it.
I'm a product of my village.
Yes, from the village.
Thanks.
Tyree, who are your favorite Black artists right now who are out there doing the work that folks should know about?
Most assuredly, I would definitely say, Ferrari Shepherd. I would say Delphin Finley, Koshin Finley, Genevieve Ganyard, Rashad Newsom, Eileen Mena, Hasef. There's like a burgeoning of Dietrich Brackens. There's a burgeoning contingent of Black artists out of Los Angeles who are taking the contemporary art world by storm. And so that's just like a quick blurb of who people should look into, because they're definitely people you're gonna wanna be able to support and put on your own walls as collectors one day.
Just quickly, and I just chip in there, Lebo Mashile, poet sister, who's got a stage play called Venus versus Modernity about Sarki Batman, who was stolen from the Southern Africa and displayed out in France. That is now being put into a film from stage, and it's an incredible. Find Venus versus Modernity by Lebo Mashile. That just popped into my head like it's happening right now. Okay.
Yes, thank you for throwing that in there. Dr. Bev, I actually have another question for you. You talked earlier in your answer about how in this moment of lockdowns and quarantines because of the pandemic, the artists were out there, we were the ones building. Your film was filmed entirely during the quarantine. What was that? Can you tell us a bit about that experience, what that was like to create an entire film during a lockdown?
It was an incredible experience. Now that the lockdown has eased, it's almost like it was a dream. There was a time when the level 5 lockdown meant that we could only step outside into your street for about an hour of exercise. And every morning it was regulated between 7 and 9. I think it was two hours in the morning. And we were not allowed to go anywhere. So all you had was the internet if you were able to connect to a Wi-Fi. And I just had my editor friend who's also a DOP lives within a 5-kilometer radius, and you were not allowed further than that without major permits. And so we'd meet at the shopping center and exchange hard drives and exchange cameras and just brief and have quick conversations and then split up and go back home quickly. So I sat in front of my computer in front of Zoom exactly like this for an entire 4 months of the lockdown, and only recently, two weeks ago, we were done with the film, and we're still in lockdown. We are on level 1 now in South Africa, which means we have a lot more freedom, and that kind of allowed me to be able to film some of the things that I needed to film and to get some of the archive material that I needed to get. But it was an incredibly joyous feeling to be able to do that. And I don't think I would have been able to make a film via Zoom and it be acceptable had we not been forced to actually sit in the space. So I didn't really have time. I mean, obviously, the emotional pressure of this lockdown, we're worried about our families, we're worried about our friends, we're losing people. There's all kinds of repression, the suppression of human rights, the violations that are happening in the streets, that is just constant and it's just ongoing. I had to focus. And I think that also saved me to a very large degree, because I probably would have done a few more illegal things. But I had to focus on the film. And it's been incredible. It's been incredibly received as well. It's brand new. It just came out last week on Sunday. And so far we've had 3 screenings, one in Oslo in Norway, in Scandinavia, one screening in Soweto. My first screening was at home in Soweto. Of course it was going to be home in Soweto. And we've had a virtual screening that was yesterday that was with a professor in Berkeley and another one in Ontario in Canada and another one in Johannesburg. And so it's already doing the things. So I'm very excited. I'm very blessed. I'm excited.
I cannot wait to see this. Congratulations. Congratulations.
You want to just check the title is Lesbians Free Everyone. It's inflammatory. It is provocative. It's intended to shake up things. Lesbians Free Everyone, look out for it.
Boom.
Definitely gonna look into that. Dr. Bev talked about the experience of creating in lockdowns and quarantines. I'm curious for the rest of the panel, what is the experience of creating been like in a quarantine or building community or trying to curate? What has that experience been like for you since the quarantine started? We can start with Tyree.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's been awesome curating in the middle of a quarantine, because what is the curator's purpose when he or she or they can't walk into a museum? And we, within my community of curators, have been forced to really think about the use of museum collections and who gets to access them, how do they get to access them, have they even been inviting to communities of color overall? And working in this moment has given me a new understanding of how museums can rise to the occasion to meet Black and Brown communities, and particularly using technology to break down the fears that that community may have, because it serves or has been perceived to serve a white audience overall. And it's been interesting. I've been building out an archive of collecting BLM protests in the West within my museum. And so I'm working with community organizers within the American West to see what that moment was like, so that we have a proper account of it in the future for future generations. So it's been fun, and it's allowed me to say that the museum can and will be accessed beyond the four walls.
Yeah.
Cleaver, how have you been creating during this moment?
It's been hard. This time to be still also meant I had to be with my own demons and the things that are going on inside of me. That it's been hard. And part of it, the way I feel like my fiction work has saved me in a lot of ways, was allowing these characters to live their lives and allowing me to make sense of mine through theirs. And because it's queer characters, of course, they seeing their lives, I guess, divulge in my brain and my imagination has helped me a lot. And I'll say also creating has allowed me to be in community in a different way. I'm really blessed to have a powerful village of people around me, a community that we have affirmed each other and come together, not just to create, but to be with each other. Because for me, art is also a healing tool. And some of that healing is actually the process, not the product. And it's been that. It's been a lot of process, not always beautiful, but a lot of process that I feel has been fruitful. And most of it hasn't been shared with the world, but we saw it, we did it. Sometimes it was just in our heads or in a phone call. But yeah, it's been that. I've allowed it to be more healing than anything, but I won't say it was easy.
Yeah.
You know, something that you just brought up that I think is so important is that even if it happens on a phone call or a WhatsApp chat or just in your own head and nobody else really sees it, it never hangs on a wall or gets sold or whatever, it can still be healing. It can still be beautiful. I love that you brought that up.
It's true.
So I have one more question for the group, and then I'm going to throw it to audience questions. My question is for everybody. How can folks keep up with all of your amazing work? Dr. Bev, let's start with you. How can folks keep up with you?
I'm on social media. I'm trying very hard to get deeper into Instagram. It's new to me. I'm old school. Facebook has always been my friend. But, you know, we describe Facebook as, you know, this is inside your home. Twitter is the streets. Instagram is... So you get a phone, put something on Insta, you get a like, you know. So I'm getting onto Instagram, and I'm at Bev Ditzy everywhere. Doesn't change, at Bev Ditzy, and that's it. I speak out a lot, and I do post a lot about stuff that I do. I do a lot of public speaking, and of course with this film that has just come out now, I'm finding myself in a lot of media spaces, speaking particularly to, you know, how we are intersectional in all the work that we do, and how we should not allow ourselves to be divided by, especially within our own queer communities, and Black and queer, how the oppression Olympics keep kind of rearing their heads, and everyone is scrambling for scraps as though, you know, there is a scarcity problem. Scarcity is just as much an illusion as is the constructs of gender and race and all these other constructs. There is, in actual fact, enough, particularly as Cleaver said, if we are here supporting one another, we have enough for all of us to be able to thrive. And I really believe that, and I saw it during the global pandemic, during this lockdown, how we were supporting each other in different ways. If you didn't have money for whatever little product you were making, we were exchanging. We were exchanging food for other items. We were community. And I think we can learn so much from that. I'm sorry, I know I diverted from the question. I am on social media at Bev Dixon.
No, I mean, you actually brought up something that I looking back, I wish we had talked about. This kind of, I think this scarcity mentality that I think a lot of Black creatives are fed, that there can only be one of us, there can only be one of you, there's only room for one. So, you know, you can't work in community with each other. That's a lie. There's enough for all of us. We should be creating from a place of abundance. I'm gonna sneak one more question in. How can we remember that Black artists deserve to create from a place of abundance and not scarcity? How do we fight that scarcity mentality that we are sold, that we know is a lie?
We do it by doing. Sorry, Cleaver. We do it by doing. No, go for it. Go for it.
I was just gonna say, I think part of it is asking ourselves, what does liberation look like, and what are we attached to? And that we cannot be attached to the vehicles. We can't be attached to Afropunk. We can't be attached to all the different iterations as much as the commitment to getting free. That these moments change names, they change leadership, these types of things, but the consistent through line is liberation. And that inside of that, if you have a liberatory belief that there's room for all of us, then you can commit towards that direction without forgetting what Dr. Bev and Tyree were saying earlier, that we live in a material world. You do have to eat and these types of things, but I don't think that's an exclusive thing to being, it's not even just abundance. It really is like, how are you trying to get free and what does that look like? And in that vision, is there abundance? In that vision, is there a multiplicity of Blackness? I think that allows us then to be less attached to these avenues that were sold in that narrative of the one and only, is that you can only be an artist if you're in an art gallery or if you're in this, that, and the third. When we know good and well, there's geniuses in the hood, for example, like where I'm from, like where Dr. Bev's from, that they're there and they're killing it, you know? And so, and they're not questioning necessarily in some ways, what does artistry look like? Because and ironically, they're not bound by that definition, you know? That also when we get introduced to these frames, we get locked within them. And perhaps the question is, how do you get outside of them so you can imagine outside of them, which is the point of art, isn't it? To imagine outside of it.
Yes, let's get free.
Let's get free.
Cleaver, where can folks keep up with all the amazing work that you are doing?
You know, I should be better about putting these things on the internet, but technically, if you follow the Black Joy Project on Instagram, you can learn more about that. And my website, cleavercruz.com. There's some things, but otherwise, just catch me in the streets or in Zoom or wherever. We'll see each other. Don't fight me in the streets. Catch me in the streets.
Hello.
Yeah, don't run up.
Hello.
Tyree, where can folks keep up with all the amazing work that you are doing?
Thank you. And I want to say, I'll say the Cleaver's response about the liberatory mindset accompanied with an abundance one. It's just completely hit that on the nail. People can keep up with me on all of the social media channels. I am at Tyree BP. Please check out my website, tyreebp.com, and let's keep building and let's get free. Let's get free, y'all.
Let's get free. All right, now we want to hear from our audience. Please turn on your camera so you can ask questions, and don't forget to unmute yourself. You can ask questions verbally. So what questions do you have from our panel? The last time we did this, it was a little sticky, so we'll see if it works this time.
No, it's all good.
Well, while folks are, oh, is that a question? Well, while folks are coming up with their questions, I actually have another question. Something that I really want to know is that all of you all are creating in different places around the world. How can we remember that Blackness is global, thus Black art and Black resistance is global? How can we keep that in mind as we create? Dr. Bev, I would love to hear from you.
I think the difficulty is that, you know, while we are sitting with our Black pain and our Black joy, it's very easy to not see what else is going on around the world. I am speaking particularly now from a place of not having, data and internet and Wi-Fi in the different spaces where we come from. For example, I wanted my sister, who's with my mom in Soweto, to watch this conversation, and she just said, I don't know even if I had enough data to be able to, if the network will allow. And so I am able to have these conversations globally. I'm able to screen my phone to a global audience online. But very few of our people are able to make those connections. And so it becomes a rather privileged conversation, because a lot of the artists that I also interact with at home are not able to connect like I am able to connect right now. And so it is through sometimes these sorts of conversations, when I do have them on local radio, whether it's local radio or it's a local media, or in the talks that we do, where we kind of try to remind everyone that, we are a global community and we are not a small little, we're not insular in our spaces. And one can only remind people, but if you live on the internet, if you live on Instagram, if you live on Twitter, I navigate these spaces. And so I see what's going on in the USA with the presidential elections that are happening right now. I see the drive from my friends who are Black in the space, who are trying to push for everyone to go and vote, because it is not pointless to vote. Please go and vote. I know I'm not over there, but we actually as people have the power to change the status quo. We just need to know it. But again, I'm able to connect because I am able to connect. Literally, physically, I'm able to connect. It's not easy for everyone else to know that we're a global community of people. And also remember, the powers that exist, the powers that be, make absolutely sure that they divide us. They make sure that they have created these hierarchies about who is superior, who's inferior, who's worthy, who is not. And so they keep us divided. And it has served them to keep us divided, because if they understand, and if we understood our power collectively, globally, as Black and brown folk, as queer folk, as feminine folk, they know that that's it. And so they have to keep us separate. And so I just really believe one of the things for me is to make sure that we break down the silos and that we reach out a little bit more to one another. And this platform is great, but we need to do a lot more for those who are not able to connect physically like this.
Agreed.
Absolutely. I saw a lot of snaps and nods. Cleaver, what do you think? How do we continue to create work that is rooted in our global Blackness and global liberation and global resistance?
I mean, part of it for me is books. I have some books right I just want to show real quick. One of them is this book I just got recently. I don't know if you can see it. It's called And Wrote My Story Anyway by Dr. Barbara Boswell, who is looking at the fiction work of South African women and how important that is in world building, particularly in that part of the world for the rest of us. As a fiction writer, I got to read this book last year called Muriel at the Metropolitan by Miriam Tlali, and it changed my life. It changed my life. This book too, reading books like this, Quarto da Despejo, which in English is Child of the Dark, which was a woman in the 60s who lived in a favela in Brazil, was basically writing on scraps of paper her life. And then it got published through the white publication channels, but it got published and it gave a voice to Black Brazilians in a way that hadn't. That for me, I remember that in a part of the world, her name, Carolina Maria de Jesus, means a lot, and it should mean a lot to the rest of us too. Same thing with Miriam's name. We should all know Miriam Tlali's name. That for me, it's those types of books, particularly from Black women, Black queer folks, that are world building and telling their stories, that for me, it informs it, because I'm a storyteller too, to keep them in my mind, in my thoughts.
Yeah.
Tyree, do you have anything to add about how we keep our Blackness global?
Yeah, we have to understand that our liberation, particularly in the States, is tethered to third world countries, or excuse me, other areas of the diaspora where we are conveying our resistance against oppression. I'm always looking at the thoughts of Malcolm X, but also the ways in which post his time in the nation, he went on an entire trip across North Africa in order to understand the plights and the ways in which Black folks were being treated across the continent. And it always reminds me that there is safe haven if we choose to create it, and that is through world building. I also believe in the thoughts and ideas of speculative writers like Octavia Butler, who constantly allow me to reimagine this present, but also to look toward a future that centers Black queer folks that have always seen what the world ought to be, but because of capitalistic structures, we don't listen. And I sense that if we use an Afrofuturistic lens that tethers the diaspora alongside the continent, I don't think we can lose. And through reading and writing, and ultimately what I present in galleries and art spaces and museums, that's the only direction to building self-esteem for Black folks overall.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we have about 15 minutes left. I would love to throw to our audience for questions. Please remember to turn your camera on and unmute yourself so our panel can hear your question. Don't be shy. What questions do you all have for our amazing panel?
I've got a question, if that's all right.
Please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. First off, thank you for everybody for being here. It's wonderful to just be in the presence of this many Black people, even digitally. But I guess one of the questions is, how do you continue to both create, if you are an artist and just kind of creating space and creating these sort of emotional landscapes that are feeding us while coexisting and divesting from capitalism, which is this ever-present thing for all of us. So like, what are some ways that you all sort of cognize how to divest from this very parasitic, toxic structure and still create space to affirm each other and globally, locally, and within different intersections of experience? And I'll take it from anybody.
Okay. Whoever wants to answer, don't be shy.
Jump in, please.
I don't have a super concrete answer, but what I'm thinking, thank you for the question. What I'm thinking about is it's an amalgam of a number of things. I don't think there's any one thing. And again, like I was saying earlier, I guess I'm saying we can create a compass through our vision of liberation, and that can be the way to help us with the question that you're saying, right? That we got to be real. We're in an in a hyper-capitalist world that a lot is working against us to entice us to be engaged in that way. So I would be phony if I'm gonna sit here and be like, well, I just turned down the money from everyone. I wish I could say that, but inside of that is being more thoughtful about where I'm gonna do it. No shade, even in this. I had to ask myself, regardless of AFROPUNK, what is the point of me being in this space and sharing? Because I don't need AFROPUNK to share this. But if the opportunity is to speak to people that I love and believe in, whether I know you or not, then I can engage in that way. I'm willing to eat that one L to be able to share this with y'all, but not at the expense of my integrity or those types of things. That there's no price for that. If you sell your soul, and you know when you do, that feeling is very hard to undo.
Absolutely, absolutely. Dr. Bev, do you have something to add? Is you nodding?
That's it. Cleva just said it, is that you know it in the pit of your stomach, you know you're doing it. You know you're saying, okay, I'm compromising a piece of myself, an important part of myself. But I think it really comes from a place of knowing who you are and what you stand for. Because, you know, I know what I stand for. I know what I won't do. And it's been offered. I've had all kinds of offers, and there are, you know, Cleva, I have turned down some money where I realized that it was going to compromise so much more of who I am in the future. And I really, my commodity, the commodity that I value more than anything right now is the fact that I do my best to be as honest as I can with my art. And the minute that starts to be compromised in any way, I know that I'm beginning to lose the sense of who I am and what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Because it's primarily never been about the money. We would like to be able to live. Of course, it will be nice to, fly first class and land in New York and live in the nicest spots. Of course, it will be amazing. But predominantly, we do what we do so that we can make a change. And those who are in charge of the status quo do not necessarily want to see this change. And so when you are able to accept to compromise a part of yourself, then anything starts to go and you start to lose the plot. And so for me, it's really, I know within myself where my lines are. And I think I've done pretty good resisting, being pushed into compromising positions as an artist. I believe I'm a conduit. I don't think that I am here just out of my own ego, and so once other things starts interfering, you stop being a conduit and it starts being about the ego. And then that's when you lose the plot, I think.
I echo both. Perfect.
We have another question from Saturn. Saturn, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question? Otherwise, I can ask it on your behalf. Saturn asks, how can we decentralize and decolonize in collaborative practice as artists? So how can we decentralize and decolonize, but still continue to have that collaborative practice as artists? So for whoever would like to answer, how do we do that?
Wow, that's a difficult question.
It's a good question, yeah.
Wow, I don't have a clever answer. I believe, and I am seeing in my environment, a lot of us are beginning to work together. I'm beginning to see a lot of us creating and curating spaces where when you know that there's an event that's coming up and you've got the space and it's supposed to be about music, I'm finding that my friends then also invite a poet to be the MC. I'm finding that art on the wall is from an artist friend who might need the money for the sales. I believe that that's kind of happening in its own organic sort of way. I am very excited to see how, again, this lockdown, which forced us all to sit down and reckon with ourselves and with the world, I'm finding that it has forced us to go back to, I don't know, it feels like an instinctive way that we used to operate, or rather our ancestors and their ancestors and their ancestors' ancestors used to operate with one another in spaces where you wouldn't find that you're just in a space and it's just music. You'd find that you're in a space and there's a whole lot of other different arts that is being curated. And so that for me is the decentralizing of just the one thing over another. I think I'm finding that, we are undoing so much that we've been conditioned to do by this kind of capitalist monopoly and how it's always operated. And I think that it's happening organically. I really am. I'm experiencing that in Johannesburg right now. I don't know about other parts of the world.
I want to throw it back to the audience. If folks have questions, do not be shy. Unmute yourself and ask them verbally to our panel.
I have a question, and transparently, Cleaver is my brother. But when all of you were speaking, I'm also an educator, and this question of integrity, all of you referred to it. And for some of us, it's a fairly new term and practice. So I was wondering what values and practices inform your integrity, and how do those values and practices ensure our collective liberation?
I think what came to mind is, like I was saying, because Tiffany's part of that village, is that I'm a part of a group of people that really hold each other accountable and are willing to say the things we might not want to hear. And so for me is in the moment that somebody outside of that group is offering me or inviting me to do something, is how would we in that space feel with that? Not on when the cameras are off and all of that. I was gonna say that's tied to practice. Like, how are those people moving in the world, and not just for the event or the whatever the thing is, but do I have a sense of how these people are moving in the world, or is this a performance? Is what I'm saying. It's part of what I ask myself, because you don't want to be on the wrong stage. That's what I'm saying.
For me, it's this overwhelming. What informs my integrity is this overwhelming confidence in Black people, irrespective of the spaces that they've been allowed to walk into, and trying and attempting to democratize the influence that we've made in certain contexts, and finally driving that excess and that profit back to Black people. It's very difficult within museums, naturally, because usually they are named after old white men. But in doing this practice and decolonizing museums, I've seen that what you choose to put up, actually curatorially, is more of a reflection of the curator than it is of the art. And so as a curator, I'm always entrenched in the grassroots things that are occurring here in Los Angeles and the communities that I'm involved with abroad, to make sure that it's as authentic and in real time as possible, in order to make sure that the stories that I've been called to steward don't fall by the wayside. And that's informed by my commitment to Black people and our liberation.
Yeah. I think for me, in the last few years, it's become a little bit easier when I started realizing what my purpose could be. I think we continue to search, we continue to find it. So it's not locked into one particular answer, but when it hit me that I am here to testify and to bear witness to not just my existence as an African queer person who is both gender non-conforming and is non-binary, and the fact that we have always existed, I am here to bear witness to that. Yeah. And so it becomes easy then to say, am I fulfilling this purpose? Mm-hmm. And if I am not, then I have to think, why then am I doing this? And how does it feed to the purpose? And if it doesn't at all, and that's where my values lie. And that's where I think for me, my integrity is centered. I feel like I'm here to speak on behalf of my great foremothers who've been erased from history. Who nobody speaks of, who, we know of the Dahomean women warriors because we've got poets and we've got, June Jordan and all the other poets who speak of them, but nobody speaks of Queen Nzinga, and nobody speaks of Nkunumanti, nobody speaks of all the other, people know of King Shaka Zulu, but nobody speaks of the fact that King Shaka would not have existed had it not been for his great aunt, who was a great military general called Mkabayi Kajama.
Right.
And she, and I probably would go by they, was a fierce warrior who looked completely non-conforming in the images that exist of her. I believe I'm here to speak on their behalf. And if I move from there, then I'm no longer here serving my purpose.
Come on, Dr. Rev.
And I just have to say how appropriate that this question came from Cleaver's sibling. Cleaver opened the panel with giving love to all of the women in the fam who paved the way. So how appropriate. I love it. So we have another question from Abby. Abby, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, go ahead.
Hi. So I do just have a quick question. So what advice would you give to people who want to start creating content and want to contribute to Black content, but are having trouble finding the confidence?
Mm-hmm. Just begin.
Just start. Mm-hmm.
I think that's it. Because that's what builds the confidence, is one step and then going, oh, wait, this works. And then the next step and then next step. So just trust yourself. Sometimes we stand in our own way so much. just trust yourself. Sometimes you do something crazy and then it works. A lot of the people who have been innovative started off with crazy ideas and they kind of make them work. And all of a sudden, you know, here's this crazy idea being something incredible. And we won't know if you don't start. You won't know that you're the next innovator of something that's going to break people's minds, that's going to just like throw a spanner in the works in such a big way that it changes the status quo. You don't know. You just don't.
I agree. That again, like I was saying earlier, it's about commitment and not attachment. You might think it's supposed to go a certain way, but if you're committed to doing it, whatever that it is, then you just have to trust what form it will take. Because, for example, with the Black Joy Project, it started with one picture of my mom on one of the most depressing mornings of my life. To post a picture of her just because I had this very spiritual impetus that said, like, right now, the calling is asking you to put this on the internet. I had no plan. This was no, like, I gathered social media experts on how to do this. It was one picture of my mom that I took on my phone. And I was posting pictures of people in my life that I loved. And that when I chose to trust it without having a plan per se, it's literally brought me around the world. It's brought me to corners of areas of where Blackness exists I never thought I would. But all of it was inside of trusting that this is what I also heard from this conversation from Dr. Bev and Tyree, is that it's bigger than us. This is not about me and the Black Joy Project, and it's bigger than that. And that I'm part of one of the few people, one of the populations of the world that gets to travel. Most of us never get to leave where we're from, especially if you're Black. So if I have the privilege to, or if the Spirit has called me to travel so that we can be in community, then I have to trust that that's part of the process of what that one picture began. And I'm saying is, I've always been scared. It's very nerve-wracking, whether it's literally getting on a plane to a place I've never been to, or just having the energy to do it at all. Because I'm also Black in the world, and there's enough that's preventing us from having the energy to be on the internet. So I would say, don't worry if you don't have a sweeping vision, or I still don't have a ton of followers, so to speak, on the Black Joy Project. And I feel richer than the people who have hundreds and thousands and millions of followers, because I've made real connections with people in real life.
Yes, thank you.
And that's part of the internet. In some ways is an avenue to that. I'm not shading the internet. I'm saying, like, don't forget that we also exist for real in 3D in the world. And that shit, that one picture led to this. So you never know.
Never know. I'll say. Agreed. Agreed.
Beautiful. That is beautiful. That is a beautiful place to end. Trust your voice, trust your gut, trust yourself, and trust your community. I want to thank our entire panel for all of their amazing work in our communities and for being here today. I want to thank all of you all in the audience for being with us today. I hope we can take what we've heard and dig in and bring it back to our families and our communities and our work. And I can't wait to spend more time with you all this weekend. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, fam. Thank you.
Thank you, fam.